Welcome back. I'm glad you're still with us here on Morning at NTV. And for those that are just joining us, welcome on board. Time now for the Kickstarter. We shall be discussing the unrest in Kenya, a look at the events in that country and how they will be affecting the political landscape there, but also how the fires within the region will, turn out depending on how we reflect, but most importantly, how we take in some of those developments. In this age of youth polycrisis of governance, we saw the rise of what is being described as the Gen Z, very aggressive bunch of youth there who took up matters and became very, very assertive and spoke with one voice, leading a government to be able to rethink some of the actions and policies that it's rolling out. Of course, that comes with the backdrop of the fact that President William Ruto campaigned on the ticket of being able to transform the lives of the hustlers being, well, those below the middle class and mainly in the urban, urban poor rather, and of course many in the rural areas who are looking at regime change or the change of government as one that was going to usher in the kind of transformation and growth as well as development. But transformative changes will not simply be possible if the scale required without the buy-in and the contributions of all the actors. Are governments across the region willing to even accommodate the sentiments of the youth, or are the youth simply going on and about, and this will find its way within the doldrums of the shelves again? I'm joined via Zoom by Peter Wamoto. Peter Wamoto is a Kenya political analyst, and I would love to begin with him. I'll be introducing my other guests very shortly who will be joining us in the studio. But let's first begin with Peter Wamoto, who should be able to draw for us a picture of what is the situation right now in Kenya and what the sentiment is in light of events in the last 1 or 2 months that saw widespread protests across the country turning violent, including the attack on Parliament and some key installations of government in protest at the taxation regime that was, of course, represented by the controversial finance bill that was shelved and eventually rejected by William Ruto, the president. We also saw the sacking of the entire cabinet on account of the fact that they were not doing the job, and in what appears to be a blame game that President William Ruto effectively laid on the cabinet. We do not know whether the cabinet actually is to blame or not, but of course, Peter Wamoto has it. What's the latest? What's the sentiment? What is your take on developments there?
As you have rightly said, I don't know if you can hear me. Can you
Peter
get me?
Wamoto, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. What has been happening in Kenya? First of all, allow me to thank my fellow youth for just going out there and expressing their issues and trying to agitate for a better environment for themselves and for ourselves as young people. So what you saw around 1 month ago, it started as a youth protest that was largely peaceful. And then along the way, criminal elements hijacked the process. And what you saw happening in Parliament, where there was a fire, people stormed Parliament and they tried to burn it down. They also went to the governor's office in Nairobi, City Hall, and they also burnt it down. They also attacked the Supreme Court and burnt it down. Now those were not peaceful protesters, but anarchists who had taken advantage of the peaceful protests. But I really thank those who came out to to participate in the peaceful protests. Myself, I've been one of them. I've been on the streets 4 times in the last 1 month, joining my fellow youth to try and agitate for better economic situation for us as the youth of Kenya, and even by extension, the youth of Uganda and the youth of the entire African continent, and maybe even the entire world. So later on, the president deemed it fit. He listened to the youth of Kenya, and he deemed it fit that some of the proposals that they had made to have certain changes in government take place was right according to him, and according also to what the youth had told him. So I also like to thank our President William Ruto. He has lended a listening ear to the youth. He didn't turn a blind eye to the issues that the youth were raising. He listened, and he has been making certain changes. You saw, first of all, he withdrew the finance bill. I've had speculations. I'm not an economic expert, but I've had speculations that the withdrawal of the finance bill will have certain consequences on Kenya, including even the debt situation that we have. But that particular finance bill was going to be too oppressive to not only the Kenyan youth, but the entire citizenry of Kenya, including even the old people, the middle-aged people, all of them who are working for government and even other private institutions. The taxes were just going to be too much. So we did not reject a finance bill. What we were rejecting was overtaxation. So the president deemed it fit to withdraw the finance bill. And as we speak right now, the previous finance bill of 2023-2024 is still in effect, because the appropriation bill of 2024 was signed into law just after the finance bill had been withdrawn. So there is no gap in terms of revenue collection, because the appropriation bill is the one which actually outlines the revenue collection measures and that are in place already. So we are still proceeding with the collection of taxes and other revenue in line with the finance bill of 2023-2024, not this new one of 2024-2025. Then you saw last week on Thursday, the president came and he actually sent home his entire cabinet, with the exception of the prime cabinet secretary, who is also the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Honorable Musalia Mudavadi, who remained in cabinet alongside the deputy to the president, Honorable Rigathi Gachagua. So we thank the president for having listened to us as young people, and to also have made certain changes. We are hopeful that when he's making those appointments, he will make sure that he includes also young people in the cabinet. That is the first thing. He had also promised in the UDA manifesto to ensure that there is gender equality. So when he's naming the cabinet, in case he chooses to name 22, we have had rumors that he might reduce the number of cabinet secretaries to 15 from 22. But in case he chooses to name 22, then we are optimistic that it will be 11 of us, men, and 11 who are women. So that number one, we get gender balance. And then number two, we cannot run away from the issue of tribalism in our country. It is an issue that has affected us. You have seen the young people, when we have come out in the streets, we have talked about being tribeless. And it is indeed a beautiful thing to witness this movement of tribeless youth, because tribalism has no place in a modern society. So we are hopeful that when the president is naming his cabinet, he should ensure that all those ministers come from at least different tribes. so that we have a balance of Kenya. If he names 22 cabinet secretaries, then let him ensure that all of them are from totally different tribes. And then maybe he said that there'll be more changes. So if he's making changes to the permanent secretaries as well, when he recruits new ones, let him also ensure now the other tribes that will have been left out of the 22 cabinet secretaries, let him now name also the remaining tribes, so that when he is sitting in cabinet and he's having cabinet meetings, it is an all-inclusive cabinet meeting with ministers and permanent secretaries from different communities, so that we can have that inclusion. Another thing, we have also talked about people with disability for a long time, but we never seem to take care of issues of people with disability. We would like to see at least one minister being someone from the community of people living with disability, so that we have an all-inclusive government, the type of government that actually addresses the issues of all Kenyans, regardless of background, regardless of tribe, regardless of any form of disability that one might be suffering from. I know people who are disabled, but they are well educated and they are up to the job. So we request the president to also include some of them in his cabinet. There's also other issues in Kenya which are going on at the moment. Even after the president made all those measures, the youth are still saying that even tomorrow, being a Tuesday tomorrow, today's Monday, tomorrow, they have said that they are going to head back to the streets. And myself, I won't be joining any further protests, because I've seen the president's willingness to negotiate. So I'm also trying to encourage my fellow young people that if the president has expressed a willingness to negotiate, then let us also at least try and have a sit down in whichever platform. You saw the other day he came on Twitter Space, and the president addressed the youth on that particular Twitter Space for around 3 hours. So whichever platform that will be used to ensure that the president can communicate directly with the youth and the youth can communicate back with the president, at least we can put a halt to the demonstrations, and then we listen. They announced yesterday that today commences a 6-day negotiation period where people will be presenting their issues to the president, including the young people of the country. So let us take this 6-day window to try and share our grievances with the president and those in authority. And then we give them some time to see if we'll see further changes. And we also even give him some time to see what type of cabinet he will name. And then now we can decide whether we want to go back to the streets. The streets will always be there. And we'll always, if we are still young, we'll always have that energy to go back to the streets and picket peacefully. But now, there's always time for everything. There's time for picketing, and there's time for negotiation. So we are hopeful that the negotiations will go well. Another thing, there has also been issues between the president and his deputy. I don't know if you people have been following over there in Uganda, but yeah, there have been some issues, and our president and his deputy have been engaging on a back and forth, name calling sometimes. The deputy president accusing certain people, certain allies of the president, of sabotaging him, of sabotaging his efforts at fighting illicit brews and other alcoholic drinks and drugs in general. So there have been issues with the president and his deputy, which we are also calling to an end as youth. Because you see, once these divisions at the top, the divisions usually have a rippling effect and they tend to affect every Kenyan who finds himself in the line of crossfire. So we are calling an end to that. We have seen recently, after the youth started picketing, there has been some improvement in terms of how the president relates with his deputy. But we are hopeful that some of these issues can also be resolved amicably. Also, just to call out the Deputy President of the Republic of Kenya, you see, in his war against alcohol, he hasn't been discriminatory. He hasn't even been trying to investigate whether some of those alcoholic drinks are legal or the ones which are illicit. He's just saying that all bars and wines and spirits need to be closed. And then now him and his government are going to issue fresh licenses for those who reapply. You see, now that is affecting legal businesses because there are people who own bars, there are people.
All right, Peter Wamoto there, an analyst and a youth activist from Kenya, giving us an overview of the sentiment right about now across the country, but also highlighting what appears to be the changing narrative, especially among those that are asking to have President William Ruto undertake diametrical changes in policy as well as rollout of government interventions. Mr. Peter Wamoto there would seem to be having a little bit of a glitch, but when we are able to clear it out, we shall return to him. Let me, Mr. Peter Wamoto, can you hear me now? Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you. So what is the next course of action in case President William Ruto does not respond to the inclusivity question that you've just addressed? The need to appoint from a wide range of options, the new cabinet, as well as some positions within government that you have just spoken about. Will that bring you back to the streets, or will it call for a different course of action?
Definitely, as I had already hinted earlier on, we are the youth and we are really energized. So we are really waiting for him to make his next move. And once he makes it, then if he doesn't address that issue of inclusivity, if he doesn't address the issues that the youth have been raising, if he doesn't fight corruption, not superficial fights, but that deep type of fight against corruption, we can assure the president that we shall be back on the streets. As I had already told you earlier, in fact, there are some youth who are saying that time for negotiation was already over, and tomorrow you're going to see some of them on the streets. So if the president is wise, the way he has been proving to be a bit wise in recent times, he has been willing to negotiate and he has been willing to listen. And that is away from his usual norm. I know for a fact people know him in Uganda as a person who has been quite arrogant, quite usually a person who just stamps a lot. But right now, he has toned down on all those issues and he has been willing to talk to the Kenyan people. He has been polite in his responses. And we are hopeful that it won't end with just mere talk. You know, we are used to him promising us a lot of things and then at the same time failing to deliver on those promises. That is one of the reasons why, in fact, the youth are in protests. If you listen to our president's manifesto when he was campaigning. Remember, he had promised to include hustlers in his government, the boda people, the mamambogas. He had told them that they were going to be in his government. But once he got into power, the type of people he was electing to cabinet were actually multimillionaires and the politicians of old and the people that we were just used to seeing. Some of them had even lost political seats and he was rewarding them. Some of them had won political seats and they were asked to resign to join cabinet. And you see now that decision has costed them. So again, when he's making his new cabinet, let him also ensure that at least we see, because there are people in the boda sector who are well educated and they have even degrees. I know the chairman of Nairobi Boda Sacco is one with a degree and he is one who can communicate well. So let the president, and he's a close ally to the president. Let the president also consider a majority of these people who are well educated, but they are working in the informal sector because the economy hasn't been operating well, and we have been forced, even as youth, to participate in some of these jobs that aren't very high paying, but because we want to have a livelihood and because we want to survive, now we are forced to do some of those jobs. So we are urging the president, when he is naming his cabinet, let him also include those from the informal sector who have qualifications. There are people with diplomas, there are people with degrees, and they are selling vegetables. Some are vending water, some are operating taxis and boda motorbikes and all that. So let him also include them because he promised them. If he, in case he doesn't fulfill his promises, again, we are going to go back to the streets because we had promised him that if, in case he fails to honor his promises, we are not going to be tired. We are going to go back to the streets. We are going to picket peacefully, unarmed. So let him also stop the crackdown on peaceful protesters. You saw when people were protesting outside Parliament, he ordered the police to shoot, to use live bullets on unarmed, innocent civilians. And this situation, our situation as a country is not any different from what we have been seeing in other countries, even some of the most developed countries in the world, like the United States of America. If I can just jog back your memory a little bit, back in 2021, after the 2020 general election in the...
Yes. Mr. Peter Wamoto, I'm afraid I'm going to have to go for a break. It's top of the hour, but when we return, this conversation will continue and we shall have our guests join in here in studio so that they can also share their sentiments on events and developments in Kenya, but most importantly, also respond to some of those aspects that you have hinted on, especially inclusivity and the fact that if President William Ruto does not make good on his promises this time round, you'll be back on the streets. We'll be right back. Do stay with us. This is Morning at NTV. Welcome back. You're watching Morning at NTV, and we are discussing the events in Kenya, especially the unrest that saw what was no doubt unprecedented in an African country's political history, the sacking of an entire cabinet in order to save a government. That is what William Ruto did. In light of the protests that had begun as early as a month ago, the Kenyan population, mostly youth, described as Gen Z, came up in arms protesting what was no doubt a controversial bill, the Finance Bill 2024, that was seen as overly punitive to the taxpayers because it was touching on those aspects, including the products that are widely consumed and were effectively being put out of reach in terms of price. Allow me return to the studio. I hope we can later on again hear from Mr. Peter Wamoto. We're having a little bit of technology glitches here and there, but as soon as they are rectified, we will be good to go. In studio, I have with me policy and governance analysts Timothy Chemonges, as well as Honorable Simon Mulongo. Many thanks for making time. Let me begin with Mr. Chemonges. When we were listening to Peter Wamoto and his overview of the events, he speaks like the typical youth, disgruntled and feeling shortchanged by President William Ruto, especially in light of the fact that his campaign for political office, for the presidency, was hinged on the hustlers, the population slightly below the middle class, and the need to work expeditiously to ensure that the transformation, including poverty eradication programs and ensuring that the urban poor in most of the notorious slums within Kenya are completely given some kind of hope and a new lease to life. However, that didn't seem to roll out the way they wanted it to. And of course, as we saw the widespread protests across the country, that sentiment came to the forefront. Now here we are, a president in a very uncharacteristic way across the region, sacks an entire cabinet, rejects a critical bill that has the express backing of the International Monetary Fund. In fact, it was a condition for to be able to manage the debt, but most importantly, put fiscal policy within line in achieving some of those objectives that the president wants to. Mr. Chemonges, what's your take?
Thank you, Chris, and good to be here. Good morning to our viewers. I think Kenya finds itself in a very interesting space within the democratic dispensation and the growth therein. The young people have come out very strongly to present their position in the country, which is a good thing. And going forward, the system, the government will have to take recognition of this specific demography. But more importantly, I think that looking at the finance bill, that could be an apex of many challenges that the country has been going through. There are more deeper and underlying issues that the country is facing that the system or the government had not taken note of. But also more importantly is on the attitude that the governments and Kenya and most of the African countries have as far as the different demographies in the society is concerned. And I think that where we are at now, there are quite a number of lessons that we pick in terms of how we respond, engage the different groups of the society. The young people seem to be predominantly in many of the African countries, the majority, and that could be a potential threat, but also could be viewed as a potential opportunity for the growth of the country. As it is now in Kenya, while it's greatly contributing to the democratic dispensation, it has come with a bit of price to be paid, which I think the rest of the countries in the region should be able to pick up a leaf. In light of the decisions of President Ruto, I think much of that is reactionary. No one had envisaged that we would be here today. And even how to respond to the whole situation, it's largely reactionary, trying to quell and to ensure that the many issues that are arising, the different reactions are dealt with in a very decisive manner. And so I think that we are waiting to see more structural changes by the president, but also more importantly, in light of how we move forward, the questions as Wamoto highlights, inclusivity comes out very clearly. I think the attitude of politicians specifically, taking for granted the issues that are facing the country, but also having to push their agenda. Because definitely, if you diagnose what is happening in Kenya, is purely a miscommunication, but also a situation where the leadership or the political class are not in tandem with what is happening.
They're out of touch.
They're out of touch, and even when they see that there are definite issues that need to be addressed, they seem to still have the attitude that our way must be what they take the day.
Okay. Honorable Simon Mulongo, I'm sure there are some aspects, of course, you agree with Mr. Timothy Chemonges, but your own overview of the events in Kenya, do you see, for example, a government that understood the undercurrents that were bubbling under it and effectively managed what could have been a worse situation, for example?
Thank you so much, and good morning, viewers. Well, I think it is hard to say whether they understood, because the way the explosive nature of the demonstrations and protesters streaming into the streets, it doesn't seem to show that they were aware. It is like they were taken by surprise, because the security agencies themselves were very uncoordinated, reacted out of time, and in most of the time they were overwhelmed by the youth protests. This to me points to the fact that they may not have been so much aware.
Okay.
And if at all they were, they could have underestimated the strength of the wave of the protests.
That's right.
Because Parliament is held on trying to quickly complete the enactment of the finance bill, and the president insisted that they should continue, they should disregard the youths, meaning that they may not have actually understood or even sized the nature of the wave.
Right there. So in light of that, the fact that he was quickly able to appear like he's pivoting, and which he did by, of course, rejecting the finance bill and asking the clerk or Parliament, for that matter, to completely kill off the clauses and then rethink. But of course, we know in the workings of many African governments, when the World Bank and the IMF is working from behind the scenes, it's really hard that this particular piece of legislation will not make its way back in another form.
Yes, actually, even within the precincts of Parliament and the State House, there's a lot of presence of staff from the West, particularly the Newton Woods institutions, trying to monitor and follow up on the particular clauses and to make sure that their conditionalities were met as they gave to government. Yes, definitely when the government realized that they're being overwhelmed after storming Parliament and burning down a number of buildings and businesses in town, the president realized that he was losing the grip, and so he started making a backtrack and a bow turn on a number of things. One, he started toning down on some clauses, but when things became so tough for him, he abandoned the idea altogether. And I'm sure there were engagements, we were aware that there were engagements between him locally, but also outside, particularly the West. I think he realized that the path that he had been driven into was backfiring.
Okay, let me stay with you shortly on this before I return to Timothy Chemonges on the aspect of government's inability to effectively have its fingers on the pulse of the population. It was at a certain point described as a deliberate explosion of protests and violence, yet we saw again, because there was no leader for that matter, and then the Gen Z who were using social media kind of took on the nature of a spontaneous implosion. This is sentiment that runs across all youth in the region, and I'm not saying anything that happens in Kenya should happen in Rwanda or in Burundi, but there is need to begin to listen to the voices of the youth, not only for purposes of ensuring they stay calm and not able to go onto the streets and protest, but to effectively put them into the policy-making table, or rather have them sit on these tables so that decisions that are made that are going to affect them, they have a say in them. Is that something that you can see being adopted across the region?
Oh, that's very important. The spontaneity of the uprising in Kenya, one, it was shocking because it shows the degree of, first of all, it looked instantaneous, but apparently there was some element of organization and coordination. I know some people want to rush to exaggerate things and say they were leaderless. They were just like the Bible described Goliath with different sizes and heights. So I think there's some degree of exaggeration of that. These people had leaders, they had mobilizers, they had facilitators, and they were quite organized with the, the first line of defense, the second line and third line in terms of, for example, Medicare, evacuation, medical evacuation and all that, treatment. So they were actually very well organized and coordinated, and they had leaders, and that's why they came up with those demands that were well articulated. But as in terms of lessons, yes, we need as governments in the region and across Africa to pick a leaf from Kenya. These protests could have been managed differently, a multifaceted way. One is the security should have acted better in a more coordinated way, despite the fact that there was a visible failure of intelligence to have actually warned the government. Secondly, they needed to be managed in terms of communication and counter-communication, because a lot of exaggerations were raised, lies, accusations, and so on. It just overwhelmed the government. They had no time to sit and organize and prepare to have a coordinated and organized response, to be able to calm, to be able to ensure that they isolate, they guard these people not to, for example, destroy property. Some of the youths actually destroyed property, even if timidly some of the local leaders are saying they were infiltrated by gangsters and all this. But how do you tell the difference between the goodwill, youths, peaceful protests, and those ones? So I think the whole thing is that they manage to identify the key issues? Were they able to quickly capture the key sentiments, the popular sentiments, and be able to respond to them, and be able to reassure them, and be able to even act? Because initially you could see there was, in that midst of confusion, there are those who were saying they must continue with the bill, and others saying, well, let's just stop it altogether, and so on. So I think the lessons here are that we must have counter communication, organization, approach that can really sort of be seen like you are sensitive to the youths, that you are hearing them, and that you are listening to them, that they can even be organized to make their points better. But they left them to be in the spontaneity to be like being attacked, being stopped, and therefore the ferociousness of the youths had to take over from civility, with which they would have communicated their points better.
Okay. Timothy Chemonges, you do appreciate that the youth are in a bit of sport of bother. The adage that they are the leaders of tomorrow is one that is thrown around quite often by those in office and who are older, but without a systematic way that allows them to take up positions in order to make these decisions, there won't be any significant dividends that can be gotten, because you can't say youth, if you are really willing and ready to take up the mantle, what are they supposed to do with that kind of willingness if they are not in these positions, or the system has not effectively ensured that the ease with which they go into these positions is something that can be available to each, wherever they were, whether you're in Zombo, you're in the Turkana region in Kenya, and not just lip service like Mr. Mulongo says. How can that be achieved?
Absolutely. I think that first and foremost, there has to be goodwill by
the establishment politicians
of the day. That there's this group of people that we must be able to take note of, looking at them as an opportunity for the country, both in terms of labor, in terms of their contribution to the economy, which is actually a gap still within the countries in Africa predominantly. Uganda has tried to put in place a number of mechanisms, including ensuring that there is inclusivity as far as young people in the policy making process is concerned, but also in terms of the position that they hold within the government and the other both in the politics but also in the mainstream.
Yeah.
But you still see that there is apathy. You still see that there are still major concerns as far as the issues that the young people are facing. And one of those which comes up very clearly is the question of employment. Two, you look at the efforts that the government is putting in place, whether it's in terms of programs, in terms of strategies that the government is like the PDM and the group. Most of them are uncoordinated. There seems to be a bit of a mismatch in terms of execution and the ideation of it. So which goes to the extent that the desire of many of these program strategies that the government is putting in place may not be easily realized. And so it leaves out the demography out of what was desired. And so I think that going forward, as far as the African establishments are concerned, is first of all to ensure that the young people, in whatever form, are part of the decision making. Two, because you may never bring on board all of them on the table, how do you ensure that you have them understand that they have been heard, they are part of the process, but their voices matter. There are definitely concerns as far as the Ugandan youth, and whether the question of whether the Ugandan youth will at a time T be where the Kenyan youth actually are. And that is definitely yes. I think that where the Kenyan youth today are is they've been pushed to the shore, and they have had to react and respond. And that is definitely destined to happen for us in Uganda at a specific point in time. If we do not put in place measures that should be able to address most of them, but definitely the ultimate way and the more sustainable approach is to ensure that the young people are in a wholesome way, both socially, both economically, and even in the political wing of how government operates, are part and parcel of the process, including those in the rural areas.
Okay. Mr. Chemonges and Honorable Mulongo, allow me welcome Mukasa Mbidde, Honorable and former member of the East African Parliament.
Thank you.
The discussion is one within which you can effectively take on the matter as the speaker, given your good offices as a former member of the East African Parliament.
Yes.
Events in Kenya and the repercussions across the region. Many may find themselves uneasy and sitting uncomfortably on how they are to reconstruct policy, most importantly fiscal as well as monetary, in order to deal with some of the challenges that William Ruto is dealing with, trying to reorganize an economy that is clearly a wreck that is speeding. You have all forces acting from all angles. The International Monetary Fund wants realignment, and people are demanding for a greater austerity to be able to ensure that you have the money and not necessarily squeeze them through taxation. And as you're trying to grapple with that, the implosion occurs. And like Honorable Mulongo rather said, it was a case of either knowing that it's going to happen, but not knowing the extent to which it will happen that way. And that's where the government found itself in. How did you see the events as they unfolded, and what does that mean for the region in general?
Yeah, thank you very much. I also greet my colleagues. First of all, looking at your question, definitely there is an effect to all the hinterland economies like Uganda and neighboring countries to the EST, to Kenya, pursuant to what is happening in Kenya. There is what we call the principle of thy neighbor syndrome. That one is a principle of economics that predetermines that instability with your neighbor subtends the same effect to your own national economy as if the instability were in your own country itself. So clearly there is an effect.
That is right.
When you look at Kenya, of course, Mr. Ruto is also sharing blame for what actually has not been caused by his own government itself. For example, the fact that when you look at net trade between Uganda and Kenya, and that Uganda now exports more than Kenya exports to Uganda, of course now that one is not Mr. Ruto's making.
It isn't.
The import substitution processes and procedures here in Uganda, the extent to which manufacturing has been assisted, has clearly, of course, reversed the historicity of economics between Kenya and Uganda, to the extent that much of the products here were originally imported from Kenya, and now we are beginning to use the Buy Uganda, Build Uganda formula. So, but then, there are again other things that, of course, you need to feel sorry for Mr. Ruto, because the bangarang that happened with the young people.
Wait a minute, what's that? The bangarang.
Yes, of course, the riots. I mean the
my audience needs
the demonstration
needs to follow
that took up that took place in Kenya. Just like my colleagues have said, it was a shock to government by the following measures. Number one, historically Kenya is known to be having any activism, any Sabasaba riots, all of them were either partisan based or ethnic based. Now here is a system of young people who are actually demonstrating without regard to any partisan basis.
That's right.
No regard to any ethnicities. In fact, police faced now a different type of demonstration where now they are facing younger people speaking English, demonstrating with their phones and taking selfies and doing nothing to police. Now, they did not know even how
to deal with that.
Yes, they did not know how to deal with it. It is completely different from whatever the Kenyan police had dealt with. Then government also now started thinking that probably this can be quelled at the time. This came at a time when Mr. Ruto thought he had actually achieved it all. First of all, he had struck a deal using Obasanjo with Mr. Raila, which in his opinion meant that once the Azimio is now on board in terms of moving, because Raila is interested in becoming chair of African Union, then he has sorted it out. There had been, of course, parliament capture by executive, and everything that he wanted would be done in parliament. So he had really dealt with everything. He had a cabinet that had been approved, even when there was a minority report pointing towards the incompetences and unethical behavior of some of those appointed. He actually had a deaf ear, and parliament was maneuvered, harangued, and maranged into passing it. And he clearly had it all, to the extent that then all that was left was for him to visit the United States. In fact, when he went there, he was even allowed to sit in the president's chair. So clearly, the man was in auto drive. It was a shock that at a time he was even beginning to punish those that are not listening to him that much, including the deputy president, by indicating that probably even next time I am not choosing you. The man had completely dealt with everything in Kenya. Now this took him unawares. He first fidgeted by thinking that probably he can even begin to use state antics, the usual state antics. Try police, because they first categorized six politicians. They said, of course, not all politicians. They said 2 politicians from the Highlands, 3 politicians from Nairobi, then some NGOs, then some businessmen. You are behind this. Now police said, well, all intelligence does not point towards what you are actually alleging, Mr. President. How do we move with this? Beginning to make sure people, the disappearances of people and even consequent killings. Because now, government had denied that there were killings. Until now, we are beginning to exhume dead bodies from Kware and all the other areas. So I can tell you that Mr. Ruto has fidgeted. I don't think anything that he does is now according to plan. It is according to outright response, you know, stealthily. Runs to Twitter, and every politician now, and there is now a very huge distance between, because what Mr. Ruto actually came with in terms of the hustler politics, that was the kind of new politics in Kenya that, in his opinion, I think he did not understand while forming government. The politics that created a dichotomy between the dinosaur politicians, those politicians that belonged to those that had led Kenya, that he actually referred to as Seliraka babies that had led Kenya since independence. This was the first person that led Kenya, right from the youth brigades. So the hustler politics had to take center stage. In his opinion, he did not actually also look at the possibility that winning government by only +1, which was the equivalent of 200,000 votes, meant that you don't have the national consensus.
That is right.
So clearly all he had needed to do was to make sure there is actually unity in terms of forming government. Even when he had won, those are things that he overlooked, and those were now the sparks. Because I can tell you that now, whether Azimio, for example, whether the opposition would like it or not, they must equally also dance to the tunes of the Gen Zs. Because if they do not do so, then they are also running a risk of being alienated from the politics of the country. So that these ones now look at their own candidate, foster one, and begin a new political dispensation that completely deals away with all the old guard.
All right. Thank you very much, Honorable Mukasa Mbidde, for that overview and, of course, emboldening perspective. Gentlemen, we're going to have to go for a break and return to do complete and give justice to this discussion, as well as look at what could be the immediate solutions that might be offered in terms of counsel from the rest of the region to Mr. William Ruto as he deals with, of course, the largest economy in the region. When it sneezes, of course, the possibility of many of us catching a cold is apparent. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're glad you're still with us here on MorningAtNTV. We are discussing the events and developments in Kenya in light of the protests that took, of course, the entire world by surprise. The Gen Z is coming up in full force to demand changes in government and critical policy. Earlier, we spoke to Peter Wamoto. He's still with us. Peter Wamoto is a youth activist, and of course, his perspective on what's happening in Kenya is very, very important. Going forward, Peter Wamoto, the next 3 months are going to be critical for the Ruto administration, but also significant for the population in Kenya. The demands that have been sought by the population, if they are not seen to be effectively given to them, what will the next course of action be? I know you've already hinted on the fact that you're returning to the streets in the immediate term if the president does not appoint a new cabinet that is all-inclusive. You also spoke about the fact that there are people who may appear to be in sectors where they may not be qualified, but actually when they are, you spoke about the chairman of the Nairobi Boda Boda Sacco. I know Saccos in Kenya are strong power centers because they hold a lot of money. If you are traveling around the city alone, every truck you see has a Sacco on it. Are you suggesting that appointment to a public office must be something that encompasses, or rather involves and allows for each and everyone right about now to be able to have a chance or a go at?
Yes, thank you for hosting me, and I've been listening to My fellow panelists, I've listened to Honorable Mukasa Mbidde, I've listened to Honorable Simon Mulongo, and I've also listened to Mr. Timothy Chemonges, and I'm really happy that they seem to have some good grasp of what is happening in our country, Kenya. I wouldn't say the same myself for what is actually going on in Uganda, but I'm really happy that they have been following what is happening in Kenya, and they have some good understanding. You saw Honorable Mukasa Mbidde talking about the president's visit to the United States, and where he was given an honorable welcome. But again, that is one of the problems which we are facing as a country. Our president, in the last 1 year and 10 months since he ascended to office, he has had a total of 64 foreign trips. That is one of the things Kenyans are questioning, and some of them have been really costly. Like the last one, he went to the United States, it cost the taxpayers over 200 million Kenya shillings. So that is one of the issues that Kenyans are questioning. Why is it that every time he has to go to foreign countries, and we are not seeing any meaningful returns to some of his trips? On the issue that you've asked me, about the appointment to cabinet, yes, we are really looking keenly at what the president will be doing, and we are strongly encouraging him to keep his promises, because when he was getting into office, he made certain promises. He said that he's representing the hustlers, and the first thing that he did once he got into office was make an about turn. We have not seen him actually representing the real hustlers of this country, even including in terms of appointments. You saw the list that he gave when he was nominating ambassadors, when he was appointing ambassadors. And again, there were no hustlers in that list. Again, when he was appointing his entire cabinet, there were no hustlers in that list. So what we are telling him, let him make appointments to cabinet, including even some of the poorest Kenyans who come from extremely poor backgrounds, but they have qualifications and they are working in informal sector. Let him employ them, let him give them equal chances as he gives the rich people. Again, one thing I want to really question our president about is the issue of his education funding, the new higher education funding model. It is not working. The university fees has been raised by over 20 times, and it is on record, and you can get it even through the HELB website, and through the Education Ministry circular that was issued directing that there's a new funding model which commenced last year, and it failed terribly. When you raise the university fees by over 20 times, a course like engineering right now is costing over 440,000 Kenya shillings per year.
I'm afraid we're going to have to... we're going to have to let this particular conversation end. We must, of course, say thank you for your time. We hope this conversation can continue another time. Of course, we shall be in touch in order to ensure that we are on ground when it comes to any development in Kenya. Many thanks for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
All right, now let's return to the studio and quickly wrap this conversation up. I'll begin with Mr. Timothy Chemonges. We are looking right now at Kenya and hoping that things settle in order for any more consequences that may affect Uganda and, of course, other hinterland economies, as Mr. Mbidde describes them, may roll out. How does the how do the regional government rather move, and what do you see happening in the next few months or so? Quickly.
So I think that this whole process, while it has come with a price for us to pay, it has come with a lot of opportunity for learning, but also for strengthening our democracy. Two, but it has also given us an opportunity to realize that there is a specific group of, there are different demographies in the population that must be taken keen interest of. The third, I think, is the fact of the trickery approach of the political class, trying to be smarter than the rest, which I think that we are seeing the political class in Kenya paying a bit of a price. An approach that I think for us in the region should be able to appreciate better. Okay. And going forward, I think that we've got to ensure that the young people, who predominantly are the majority, are taken keen interest of. They are heard, the issues that are underlying the employment, but also more importantly, their contribution to the economy, but also participation in the whole policy-making process, and even being part of these governments. And lastly, the attitude towards the demographies. All
right. Honorable Mulongo, you're up on this?
Well, I think that I also want to agree with my colleague Chemonges that the lessons are big. One is to ensure that our monetary and fiscal policies address the most vulnerable, particularly the youth bulge. The youths who are getting educated, the youth who are being churned out of universities and other tertiary institutions, and that rate of churning out is not commensurate with the rate of growth, the rate of employment opportunities. So really we must do a lot, because this explosion is not just in Kenya, it is actually everywhere. And developing economies are sitting on a powder cake. If we do not work steadfastly towards that, then we're doomed. Because you see, we inject a lot of resources in areas that do not necessarily foster employment opportunities. The other one is taxation. Our taxation structures and regimes tend to be more exploitative than constructive, where when you milk a cow, you have to feed it.
That's right.
So you find that sometimes the taxation systems approaches are just to enhance collection, but not enabling the people to be entrepreneurial. Okay. And of course, there are other managerial issues, security issues, which I don't have to go into now, but which were lapses in Kenya that we need to learn from.
No doubt. When we speak security and intelligence in light of the political undercurrents in the region, we shall invite you, no doubt. Honorable Mbidde Mukasa.
Yes. I pity the Honorable Ruto, because running a government in accordance to the aspirations of the gallery and the decisions of the gallery is going to be very, very expensive for him. We are used to knowing that actually the dog wags its tail, but now we are looking at the tail wagging its dog, and I think that is applying in Kenya. I hope that can succeed, because government is run according to plan. Planning is done in accordance to resources.
That's right.
And when you are stopped from taxing or told to tax before any planning has been done, obviously, then you are affecting industrialization. You are in effect affecting employment. In fact, he has missed out on campaigning for the next term. What he is now concentrating on is campaigning to win this term that already he's leading, and I pity him.
Survival board. Yes. Honorable Mukasa Mbidde, many thanks. Honorable Simon Mulongo, many thanks for your submissions too. And of course, to my immediate left, Timothy Chemonges, a policy and governance analyst, many thanks. Let me now go to my man on the ground, Stephen Mbidde, who is standing by. A very good morning.